Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The vacancy sign, a battered neon heartbeat, pulsed weakly in the rear view as the highway unspooled. Black and vacant before me. Beside me, the new weight in the passenger seat shifted. A gaunt silhouette with a beard like tangled wire, radiating a nervous energy that prickled the hairs on my neck. Hitchhikers were common currency on these long hauls, but this one resonated with a discordant frequency. My casual charity, I sensed with a tightening gut, was about to veer sharply off the map of the ordinary, straight into a sleepless geography of terror that would demand every ounce of instinct I possessed. Silas, they call me. For nigh on 10 years, I've traced the asphalt arteries across this continent. The sheer, hypnotic pull of the open ribbon, the kaleidoscope of landscapes bleeding one into the next, the siren song of the unknown just beyond the next rise. It's a language my soul understands. I've collected strange sights like roadside gravel under my tires, but the tableau that unfolded under that bruised desert moon was scribbled in a different, darker ink. Midnight had bled well past its zenith. Hours dissolved into the drone of the engine, the stark desert plains outside blurring into a monotonous gray wash. Fatigue pressed heavy, a physical weight behind my eyes that even the bitter dregs of thermos coffee couldn't lift. Then a smudge against the darkness, a solitary figure etched against the shoulder, thumb starkly crooked, a pause, the lateness, the utter remoteness. Caution whispered, but the shape seemed deflated, harmless enough. I'd stood on shoulders like that myself, tasted the desperation that makes a stranger's headlights feel like salvation. The car sighed to a halt, the passenger window humming down. Destination, my voice felt loud in the silence. Just a stretch down this vein, he rasped, words coated in dust and disuse. Name's Elias. I offered mine, thumbing the lock open. He folded himself into the seat, bringing with him an air thick with stale perspiration and an unidentifiable, faintly metallic undertone. Road grime, I reasoned, nudging the car back into the current of the highway. Silence settled, dense and watchful, punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of rubber on pavement and the low, indistinct murmur from the radio. Attempts at casual conversation, origins, destinations, met curt, evasive replies. Elias seemed less interested in sharing than in gathering, his gaze flicking to my fuel gauge, his questions probing my route, my last stop. Mile after desolate mile clicked over the odometer, and the wrongness solidified from vague premonition to palpable tension. Elias's hands resting on his knees betrayed a fine tremor. His eyes, restless mirrors, constantly scanned the road behind us, searching for phantoms in the dark. Everything all right? I ventured, aiming for nonchalance. Seem a little tightly wound. His posture went rigid. Fine, he clipped out, the word sharp-edged. Just keep the wheels turning. The atmosphere thickened, becoming almost suffocating. Regret, cold and sharp, pricked at me, ejecting him here, though, into this void, impossible. Then the night fractured. Twin strobes of red and blue blossomed in the rear view, painting the cabin in frantic bursts of color. A patrol car closing fast. Relief surged, a clean wave washing over the accumulated dread. Authority, order, whatever coiled spring was wound tight in Elias. This would surely unwind it. But as my foot eased towards the brake, his hand shot out, fingers clamping onto my forearm with startling, wiry strength. "Don't," he hissed, eyes wide and feral with panic. "Don't you dare stop. We stop. We're both fossils." My pulse hammered against my ribs. "What? It's the law!" Elias let out a bark of laughter, utterly devoid of humor. "That's no law you recognize, believe me. Now, drive." Against every screaming instinct, my foot slammed down. The engine howled in protest as the pursuing lights intensified, a siren ripping through the night stillness. "What in God's name is happening?" I yelled, knuckles white constellations on the steering wheel. Elias's hand dipped inside his worn jacket, emerging with the flat, ugly gleam of metal. A gun, ice water sluiced through my veins. "Later," he promised grimly. "Right now, shake them." My mind spun, a chaotic vortex. How had roadside altruism curdled into this? Gunpoint persuasion, spectral pursuers, choices evaporated. The accelerator hit the floor. What ensued wasn't driving, it was a desperate, high-velocity prayer, whispered in screeching tires and roaring cylinders. We devoured the empty highway, the phantom cruiser glued to our tail, its siren an incessant shriek. Elias urged me faster, faster, barking sudden directions onto barely their side roads. Gravel spitting against the undercarriage. Time lost all meaning, reduced to the frantic focus of keeping metal on tarmac, of outrunning the relentless lights behind us. Eventually, impossibly, after an eternity compressed into minutes or hours, we lost them. Darkness swallowed the pursuing lights. I slewed the car onto a deserted shoulder, the engine ticking like a time bomb, my hands trembling so violently I fumbled with the ignition key. "Okay," I breathed, turning to face him. "Answers, now." Elias remained still for a long beat, the gun still clutched, a heavy punctuation mark in his shaking hand. Then, haltingly, the story spilled out. A narrative so laced with paranoia and shadow governments, it felt ripped from a fever dream, except for the chillingly real chase echoing in my bloodstream. He claimed a past life as some government cog who'd stumbled onto a conspiracy vast and deep-rooted. The hunters, he insisted, were tendrils of this unseen entity, woven into the fabric of authority itself. "Everywhere," he whispered, eyes darting across the barren landscape. "Cops, feds, trust no one. I have proof. Proof that could shatter everything. They won't let it see daylight. They won't let me see daylight." I sat there, suspended between disbelief and the undeniable terror we'd just shared. Part of me screamed delusion, yet the adrenaline still sang proof of the pursuit. "So what's the play?" My voice sounded unnervingly steady. Elias consulted a cheap digital watch, his brow furrowed. "Keep moving. Got a contact point few hours out. Reach them, we find sanctuary." Options flickered like dying embers. Flee. With the gun, with the memory of those relentless lights. A fool's gamble. And if, by some terrifying chance, his story held a grain of truth, I was already neck-deep. Might as well swim for the far shore. Through the remaining darkness we drove, hugging tertiary roads, every pair of approaching headlights a potential threat. Elias's paranoia was a contagion. Soon, my own nerves frayed at every rustle, every distant engine note. Dawn smeared the eastern horizon with bruised colors as we rolled into a small, anonymous town clinging precariously to the edge of nowhere. Elias directed me towards a motel that looked like it had surrendered long ago. Paint peeling, neon sign fractured. "Stay put," he ordered, unfolding himself from the car, making contact. I watched him vanish into a numbered door, the cheap wood closing behind him with a hollow click. Minutes stretched, elastic and tense. An hour bled away. A wrongness settled, heavy and cold. Impulse, sharp and decisive, propelled me from the car. I moved towards the room, footsteps silent on the cracked pavement. Nearing the door, voices seeped out, Elias's and another, low and menacing, arguing. "You brought him here," the stranger hissed, venom dripping from the words. "An unknown. Are you compromised?" "No choice," Elias countered, his voice tight. "It's fine. I'll deal with it." Ice crystallized in my gut. The fool wasn't him, it was me. I turned, a silent pivot towards escape, but a hand clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around. Elias stood there, the gun now leveled squarely at my chest. "Apologies," he murmured, and a flicker of genuine regret crossed his haggard features. "You heard too much." Time seemed to thicken, stretching the moment into an eternity. Fragments of my life, endless highways, fleeting faces, sunrises over mountains, rain on windshields, flickered behind my eyes. This wasn't the end I'd envisioned. Desperation, raw and primal, surged through me. My fist flew, a blunt instrument connecting solidly with his jaw. He staggered, a grunt escaping him. The gun barked, a deafening crack, the projectile singing past my ear. No second chances. I ran with lungs searing, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the pavement blurring beneath my pounding feet. Shouts erupted behind me, the slap of pursuing footsteps echoing in the narrow spaces between buildings. But this was my terrain, the forgotten capillaries of America's roadside sprawl. I weaved through alleys rank with decay, scaled leaning fences, plunged through the skeletal remains of abandoned structures. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit dwindled, swallowed by the waking town. Still, I ran, not stopping until the wide, indifferent expanse of the highway stretched before me. Fortune, or perhaps the road's strange mercy, sent a semi bearing down. I flagged it, a wild apparition with ragged breath and frantic eyes. The driver, a woman whose face held the quiet wisdom of countless miles, took one assessing look and swung the passenger door wide. "Trouble, hun?" she asked softly as I hauled myself into the high cab. I could only nod, gulping air. She asked no more, just engaged the gears, the truck pulling smoothly away. As the town and Elias and his labyrinthine conspiracies shrank in the side mirror, relief warred with a residual tremor of fear. I knew the feeling of being watched would linger, a phantom shadow cast long across my future journeys. Yet, as the miles accumulated and the adrenaline subsided, a different understanding began to surface. The terror had been absolute, yes, but it had also forged something new within me. A resilience I hadn't known, a sharper edge to my will to survive. The open road, my constant siren, had always promised the unexpected. It had delivered profoundly and perilously, picking up strangers, perhaps not again soon, but surrender the life, the endless horizon, never, because somewhere beyond the reach of hidden agendas and men clutching desperate measures, the asphalt still beckoned, humming with untraveled possibilities. I was still here, still rolling, still chasing that line where earth meets sky as the sun climbed, igniting the clouds in fierce oranges and pinks. I felt it, not erasure of the fear, but a quiet affirmation beneath it. Whatever waited down the line, whatever new challenges the road unfurled, I would meet them. I was, after all, a survivor. And the road, my dangerous, beautiful, unpredictable road, was still calling my name. An irregularity marked my entrance into that sepulchral studio. The corridor air hung thick, a miasma of damp concrete and the phantom bitterness of long-extinguished cigarettes. A constriction, tight as a fist, seized my chest as I turned the key and pushed the door inward. Overhead, a naked bulb stuttered a brief Morse code of light before succumbing to a steady, weak illumination. The walls vaulted higher than anticipated, weeping umber trails that bled from ceiling to floor like ancient wounds. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound possessing an unnatural gravity. I stood rooted, my satchel of brushes and pigments suddenly alien in my grip, a faint, high whine singing in my ears, a cheap birth, space to bleed onto canvas. That was the bargain. Cracks, a touch of damp, these were acceptable flaws, I'd reasoned. Yet the very plaster of those walls sent an icy reconnaissance patrol up my spine. The studio itself was cavernous, a single concrete-floored expanse culminating in one tall window at the far end. This aperture gazed onto a constricted alleyway, occasionally echoing the ghost of traffic from the unseen street beyond. My supplies found a temporary home in a corner, their proper arrangement deferred. I commenced a perimeter check, tracing the walls, my fingers mapping the rough topography of aged plaster, probing spots that radiated suspicion, patches of bloom like dark constellations of mold, marred surfaces here and there. Manageable, I assured myself, easily purged. The imperative was to erect my easel, to lose myself in creation. The shapes suggested by the stains, those Rorschach blots hinting at silhouettes, I consciously dismissed as mere caprice of water damage. Night fell, swallowing the limited daylight. I wrestled my canvases into the room, arranging them near the heart of the space. An old trestle table became the altar for my brushes and paints, presided over by a small task lamp whose focused beam offered refuge from the harsh glare above. Each footstep resurrected the groaning protest of floorboards. From the walls themselves emanated subtle crepitations, the sighing exhalations of a structure settling into its bones. Or so I told myself. Before a virgin canvas I stood, a supplicant awaiting inspiration's spark. What came instead was a draft of peculiar coldness. A swift inventory confirmed the window sealed shut. Nothing visibly amiss. I compelled my gaze back to the blank expanse, charcoal poised. Rough lines began to emerge, tentative sketches, yet my hand felt curiously detached, tremulous, my focus fractured, drawn repeatedly to the far wall, a primal expectation of movement flickering at the edge of sight. Several times I halted, angling the lamp, scrutinizing. The fissures in the plaster seemed to deepen under the directed light, acquiring dimension. Phantasmal shadows, untethered to my own form, seemed to writhe just beyond perception. Retreating a step, I rubbed tired eyes. Exhaustion, surely. The canvas remained untouched by true design that night. Sleep, sought on a narrow cot tucked near the corner, proved elusive, a shallow tide receding from the shore of consciousness. Every sound amplified, the percussive clang of pipes, distant footfalls haunting the corridor, the sibilant hiss of the radiator. Twice I startled awake, heart hammering, gripped by the unshakable conviction that someone stood sentinel near the window. Dawn arrived grayly, accompanied by a neck stiff as rusted iron and a dull throb behind my eyes. Coffee, brewed bitter on a small electric ring, did little to dispel the fug. The canvas beckoned again, demanding something vital, something new. Pigment squeezed onto the palette, colors swirled, broad strokes attacked the surface. My usual inclination leans towards abstraction, the non-representational. But this time, inexplicably, the gestures coalesced, hinting at the human form. No conscious decision guided this. The brush seemed possessed of its own volition. Attempts to deviate, to fracture the image into geometry, proved futile. The paint insisted, stubbornly contouring a figure. A faint scrape originating somewhere behind me. I pivoted, pulse leaping. Only the tall, stained walls returned my stare. Crossing the floor, I pressed my palm against a web of cracks. The plaster felt cold, unnervingly damp despite the dry air. A single, slow drip echoed from somewhere overhead. My gaze scanned the ceiling. More stains, intricate as maps of unknown lands. Returning to the easel, a jolt went through me. The figure I'd been painting wasn't quite as I'd left it. Its limbs, previously contained, now seemed to stretch subtly towards the canvas's left edge, a gesture of silent reaching. A trick of the light, I reasoned, a misinterpretation of my own chaotic strokes. I cleansed the brush, dipped it anew, forced myself onward. By midday, a rudimentary figure haunted the canvas, devoid of specific features, mere hollows suggesting eyes and mouth. Its emptiness radiated a disquieting sentience. Looking at it felt like being looked back at. I stood restless, tapping a foot, unnerved by my own creation. Reaching for more paint, my hand quivered. The fine hairs on my arms prickled, the air itself seeming to hold a static charge. Late afternoon drove me out for supplies. Emerging into the corridor, I registered the dim, fitful pulse of the hallway lights. Neighboring doors remained resolutely closed, silent. The absence of any sound from other occupants felt peculiar in a building of this vintage. Descending the stairs, my footfalls were swallowed by the echoing stairwell. Outside, the city air felt bracingly real. I inhaled deeply, releasing a breath I hadn't known I was holding captive. Paints, fresh brushes, a hastily purchased meal. The errands felt automated, overshadowed by a knot tightening in my gut, a profound reluctance to return. Re-entering the studio felt like plunging into deeper water. The gloom seemed to have intensified, the corners pooling with shadows that the overhead bulb couldn't penetrate. I deposited my acquisitions on the table and approached the canvas. I froze. The figure, it had shifted again, undeniably. One arm now gestured more explicitly, pointing towards the far, deeply stained wall. A tremor ran through me, heart thudding against my ribs. I reached out, touched the painted surface. Dry, utterly dry. My eyes swept the room. Had the easel been bumped, tilted, Nothing was disturbed. Swallowing against a rising tide of panic, I dredged up memories of past frights, moments when imagination had conjured specters from shadows. This was the same, I insisted silently, nerves frayed by the unfamiliar space. As dusk bled into night, I positioned my lamp to illuminate a different section of wall, intending to start anew to escape the first canvas's unnerving gaze. A fresh canvas was mounted, broad swaths of color applied with forced energy, a deliberate distraction. Yet my attention remained tethered, my gaze flicking constantly over my shoulder towards the first painting, anticipating further animation. Each glance tightened the knot in my chest. Sweat slicked my palms. I wiped them on my worn trousers, compelling my hand to move across the new surface. Around 10, a soft, distinct knock sounded at the door. I went utterly still, eyes locked on the handle, expecting it to turn. Silence followed. No voice, no second rap, nothing. The hallway beyond felt immense, suffocatingly quiet. An impulse warred within me. Fling the door open, confront the void. But a stronger, colder instinct kept me paralyzed. Minutes stretched. Eventually the tension eased fractionally, enough for me to attempt a return to the second canvas, though the echo of the knock demurred. Later, exhaustion must have claimed me, slumped over the table. A faint skittering near the window jerked me awake. My eyes snapped open, fixed on the glass. A fleeting darkness slid past, a shadow, perhaps someone traversing the alley below. Rising stiffly, I crossed to the window. The alley lay empty, bathed in the jaundiced glow of a distant street lamp. A rusted fire escape clung precariously to the adjacent brickwork. No one lingered there. My mouth felt like parchment. Reaching for the water glass on the table, I noticed the task lamp was extinguished. I had no memory of switching it off. Only the overhead bulb persisted, casting harsh, clinical light. My heart hammered anew as my gaze inevitably found the first painting. The figure had altered once more. Both arms were now outstretched, beseeching or warding, and behind it, two fainter, more nebulous shapes had materialized. A wave of visceral fear washed through me, cold and sickening. My vision swam. Mechanically, I approached the canvas, hand outstretched. The paint felt solid, inert, yet the forms depicted pulsed with a terrifying semblance of life. I stared, transfixed, feeling sweat trace cold paths down my back. The following day demanded routine. An early rise, a brisk shower in the communal bathroom down the hall, a solitary breakfast at a nearby greasy spoon. Daylight, I prayed, would cauterize the night's anxieties. Returning to the studio, armed with resolve, the air immediately felt wrong. A musty odor redolent of decaying fabric clung to the space. It felt heavier, somehow denser. Throwing open the window offered no relief, only admitting a sour gust from the alley. I sealed it again, choosing to endure the smell. Another canvas. Force myself. Something bright. A landscape, an anchor to the tangible world. My strokes were ragged, uncertain, but layers of color began to build. Then a whisper, soft as moth wings, breathed directly behind me. It sounded like my name, Elias. I spun around, hands clenched, empty space. A violent tremor seized my hands. The brush slipped from my grasp, clattering to the concrete, spattering viridian paint across my boots. Cursing under my breath, I snatched a rag, stooping to clean the mess. A profound sense of dread descended, heavy as a shroud. The urge to flee surged, powerful and primal, yet stubbornness. A refusal to capitulate to fear rooted me to the spot. In the afternoon, footsteps sounded overhead, pacing back and forth directly above my studio. Then abrupt silence. I waited, listening intently, but the steps didn't resume. My gaze drifted upwards. Who occupied the room above? The building super had mentioned the upper floors were largely vacant. Unease prickled. Thoughts of unseen watchers, of stealthy movements crowded my mind. A quick check of the hallway revealed only echoing emptiness. Evening found me depleted, hollowed out. I sat on the cot, staring at the walls, where the stains seemed to actively coalesce into leering visages. Fatigue, hunger, rational explanations offered little comfort. Instant noodles consumed in silence amidst the radiator's intermittent hissing, and the overhead bulb's continued flickering did nothing to fill the void. My second painting, the attempted landscape, lay abandoned, looking twisted and incomplete. The first painting, however, dominated the room, its presence undeniable. The figure's features had sharpened, gained definition. The suggestion of eyes now seemed to possess focus, tracking my movements. A new strategy formed: obliteration. I would paint over it, erase the unsettling figure entirely. Grabbing a wide brush and a can of thick gesso, I stood before the first canvas. My hand shook as I began applying the white primer. As the brush passed over the spectral face, a low whisper curled into my ear, intimate and chilling. I recoiled violently, the brush flying from my hand, striking the canvas and leaving a starburst of white across the figure's form. The whisper ceased, but my heart raged against my ribs. Gritting my teeth, I retrieved the brush, forcing myself to continue. Layer upon layer of white, yet the figure refused complete annihilation. Its outline remained, a persistent ghost beneath the surface, a palimpsest of fear. Finally, breathless, I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of a paint-stained hand. My pulse throbbed, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I became aware of the encroaching darkness in the studio's periphery. The overhead light seemed to be failing, its glow weaker, more anemic. Flicking the switch yielded only more pronounced sputtering. I moved my task lamp closer, but its focused beam only deepened the shadows massing behind me. Departure beckoned, escape for the night. Yet the urge to finish, to completely vanquish the figure, felt obsessive, almost compulsive. I resumed painting, faster now. Strokes bordering on frantic, faint noises surfaced behind me, a soft shuffling, the impression of muffled breath. I whirled around, brush dripping, confronting emptiness once more. My own breathing grew shallow, ragged. My hand trembled uncontrollably. Enough! Stepping away from the easel, I conceded defeat for the night. Morning would suffice. I walked towards the door, keys in hand, ready for the reprieve of the outside world. As my fingers closed around the knob, an intense, needle-sharp chill touched the nape of my neck, like icy breath exhaled against my skin. Every hair on my arms bristled, my throat constricted. Spinning around, fists clenched, I faced the silent room. Nothing. My entire body was vibrating with adrenaline. The painting stood sentinel in the dim light, mute observers. The first canvas, despite the layers of white, still held the phantom outline. The second, the landscape seemed warped, contorted by my own terror. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The walls felt unstable, leaning inwards. I wrenched the door open, stumbled into the corridor. Down the echoing stairs, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The lobby yawned, deserted. The heavy front door groaned as I pushed through it, spilling onto the pavement. Deep breaths of night air, sharp and cool. My hands were damp, my mouth arid. I paced the block, trying to walk off the tension, eyes darting at every sudden noise, a bottle clattering into a bin, a car door slamming, distant shouts. The city's indifference felt alien. I was adrift, acutely aware of my own frayed edges. Returning felt like madness, yet the thought of abandoning the studio, the work, felt equally impossible. Rent paid, canvases waiting, a responsibility or perhaps a darker compulsion. Ignoring the leaden weight in my stomach, I re-entered the building's maw. The ascent was slow, hand trailing the cool metal railing, the stairwell lights humming a low, buzzing dirge. At my door, the key turned. The lock clicked. Stepping inside, I held my breath, listening. Only the frantic percussion of my own heart answered. Drawn by an invisible current, I moved directly to the canvases. They appeared unchanged, yet the feeling in the room had intensified, a palpable presence that made my skin crawl and scattered my thoughts. Seizing a clean brush, I resolved to paint something simple, grounding. The geometry of the room itself, perhaps. Dipping into black paint, I made tentative strokes on a third, smaller canvas, but my mind refused discipline, my pulse refused calm. Vague figures began to emerge again, unbidden, their limbs distorted, features blurred into anonymity. I stopped abruptly, sensing a subtle vibration through the soles of my shoes. It felt like a rhythmic tapping emanating from the concrete floor beneath me. The basement, the super had said, was merely storage. Kneeling, I pressed my ear to the cold floor. A faint, indeterminate murmuring reached me. Perhaps the gurgle of old pipes, perhaps voices. A sharp pain lanced through my temples. My watch showed it was long past midnight. Sleep, however improbable, seemed the only option. I retreated to the cot, lying down fully clothed, eyes wide open in the dimness. Sleep must have eventually ambushed me. I woke with a violent start to the sound of canvas impacting the floor. Bolting upright, I saw the second painting, the landscape, lying face down. Scrambling across the room, I lifted it, propping it back onto its easel. The paint was smeared, damaged by the fall. My stomach lurched. Touching the surface confirmed my fear. Parts of it were still tacky, slick. As I steadied my breathing, I noticed them. Fresh streaks marring the background, thin lines disturbingly reminiscent of finger marks. My hands flew to my face. They were clean, paint-free. I hadn't touched it. The walls seemed to pulse, closing in. Sweat beaded on my forehead, hot and stinging. Air. I needed air again. Snatching my jacket, I killed the weak overhead light, plunging the studio into near blackness, and fled. I'll return in the morning, gather my materials. Whether I can continue here, I don't know. These are not mere shadows, not tricks of light or fatigue. They interact. They alter the work. They deny rest. They seem to crave representation, demanding I give form to their presence, voice to their silent narratives through my brush. Leaving permanently feels less like an option and more like a temporary parole they might revoke at will. Yet this constant siege of fear is unsustainable. Here I stand, beneath the building's indifferent facade, gulping the night air. My gaze keeps drifting upward, towards the dark rectangle of my studio window. The light is off, extinguished by my own hand, yet I could swear I see movement within, a flicker of deeper shadow against the gloom. A cold, heavy certainty settles in my gut. My heart pounds, a slow, insistent drum against my ribs. Tomorrow I go back inside. Perhaps I will face them directly. Perhaps I will paint until their demands are met, until their story is bled onto the canvas. Whether that brings peace or deeper entanglement, I cannot guess. But walking away feels impossible now. I am caught in their orbit. They want to be seen. I will paint them. I will try to translate their haunting. I only hope Elias can survive the translation, because the edge feels terrifyingly close, and the shadows within are pulling, insistently pulling me back. The first inkling that reality had frayed at the edges came when the car's navigation system, with synthetic bonhomie, declared, "You have arrived," while my headlights illuminated only an untamed track dissolving into fog-choked woods. The second tremor arrived with the dawning awareness that an hour had elapsed devoid of fellow travelers, human habitation, or even the humble reassurance of a road sign. Yet it wasn't until I rolled into the time-lost hamlet itself that the profound meaning of disorientation truly crystallized. My name is Elara. Precision is usually my compass, every detail charted. But that specific Friday dusk, impulsivity seized the helm. A colleague's whisper of a bucolic bed and breakfast, an idyll nestled deep in the countryside, had planted a seed. On sheer whim, I'd tossed a valise into the back, fed the coordinates to the digital oracle, and surrendered to the highway's pull. The initial hours unfurled pleasantly enough. Urban density bled into suburban sprawl, then yielded to undulating hills, awash in the sunset's fiery oranges and bruised purples. A fragile sense of adventure fluttered within me. This nascent exhilaration began to tatter as the asphalt devolved into progressively narrower, neglected byways. The navigation system insisted, unwavering, that the path was true, yet doubt coiled like a cold serpent in my gut. Could this derelict route possibly lead to a sought-after retreat? When the device proclaimed mission accomplished amidst this sylvan emptiness, I knew the coordinates were corrupted, the destination a phantom. Reversing course proved futile. Twilight bled into full dark, rendering every tree-shrouded lane indistinguishable from the last. My phone, stripped of signal miles back, offered neither lifeline nor map. A frisson of panic spiderwebbed through me, amplified by the insistent blink of the low-fuel indicator. The last outpost of gasoline lay over an hour behind me, dismissed with the careless confidence of imminent arrival. Now the needle hovered precariously over empty. Just as the grim prospect of a night spent cramped and cold in the driver's seat began to solidify, pinpricks of light glimmered ahead. Relief, potent and sudden, surged through me. Civilization. Drawing nearer, I discerned the shape of a small town. The sign meant to welcome visitors was bleached and weathered, the name barely legible. Havenwood. Unfamiliar but utterly welcome. All I craved was fuel and perhaps refuge for the night. I navigated the main thoroughfare at a crawl, absorbing the tableau. An undefinable dissonance hummed in the air. The architecture was archaic, plucked from sepia-toned photographs. No contemporary facades, no familiar chain eateries, not even the mundane pulse of a traffic signal. And despite the lights that had beckoned from afar, the streets remained utterly deserted. I eased up beside what appeared to be a filling station, its antique pumps standing like rusted sentinels in the swirling mist. A faint chime echoed as I stepped out, but no attendant materialized. Corrosion climbed the pump's flanks. The place radiated decades of disuse. "Hello?" My voice felt alien, too loud in the profound stillness. "Anyone here?" Silence answered. The door to the station's small attached shop was firmly locked, its windows obscured by a thick shroud of dust. A chill unrelated to the cool night air traced its way down my spine. Something was profoundly amiss. Retreating to the car, I thumbed the locks down. Someone, anyone, had to exist in this place. Someone to provide bearings, a route back to the known world. I drove deeper into Havenwood, past facades with shuttered windows and houses steeped in shadow. The entire town felt staged, unnervingly pristine in its antiquity, yet devoid of authentic life, a meticulously crafted but uninhabited diorama. Then salvation, a lit window in a building suggesting a small diner. Hope flared anew as I parked and hastened towards the entrance. A bell tinkled overhead as I pushed through the door, stepping into a perfectly cryopreserved relic of the 1950s. Cherry-red vinyl booths gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Tables boasted chrome trim, and the floor was a checkerboard expanse of black and white tiles. Behind the counter, an elderly woman stood ramrod straight in a crisp uniform, a jaunty paper cap perched on her gray hair. She offered a smile, but an unsettling quality lurked beneath its surface, making my skin prickle. "Welcome to Havenwood, dear," she rasped, her voice possessing the fragile crackle of antique radio waves. "You look turned around." Hesitantly, I approached the counter. I am, yes, my navigation system led me wildly off course. I was just hoping for directions back to the highway. The woman's smile stretched, revealing an unnerving number of teeth. "Oh, we don't see many new folks passing through Havenwood. Why not take a seat? Have a slice of pie. We can sort your directions once you've rested yourself." Every nerve ending screamed retreat, but desperation for guidance held me captive. I slid into a booth, observing her as she moved behind the counter, humming a discordant, tuneless melody. She placed a plate before me, a wedge of cherry pie. Visually perfect, yet its aroma was subtly wrong. Cloyingly sweet, laced with an unidentifiable, faintly chemical undertone. "I'm sorry," I managed, nudging the plate slightly away. "I'm not really hungry. If you could just point me toward the main road, I'll be on my way." The woman's smile vanished instantly, her features solidifying into a mask of sharp displeasure. "Now, that isn't very courteous, is it? After I went to the trouble, you won't even sample my pie." The bell above the door jangled again. I swiveled to see several figures drifting into the diner. Their movements were stiff, vaguely artificial, their faces impassive, eyes vacant. They arranged themselves deliberately, forming a silent barrier between me and the exit. Panic clawed at my throat. "Look, I truly appreciate the offer, but I really must leave." I pushed myself to my feet, but the woman's hand darted out with startling swiftness, clamping onto my wrist. Her grip map was iron, her skin unnaturally cool, with a texture like smooth wax. "I'm afraid we can't allow that, dear," she stated, her voice now utterly bereft of its earlier feigned warmth. "You understand, we don't get many fresh faces in Havenwood, and we do so cherish fresh faces." The newcomers were shuffling closer, their locomotion jerky, puppet-like. Under the harsh diner illumination, their skin possessed a strange, manufactured sheen. Adrenaline surged. I wrenched my arm free with violent force and lunged for the door, shouldering past the encroaching figures. Their hands, cold and unyielding, grasped at my clothes, but I tore loose. Scrabbling for my keys, heart hammering against my ribs, I reached the car just as the diner door swung open behind me. The engine caught with a roar. Tires shrieked on the asphalt as I tore away. My rear-view mirror framed a terrifying egress, figures spilling from doorways all along the street, converging, moving with that same stilted, unnatural gait, arms outstretched as if to physically reel my vehicle back into their grasp. I careened through the town, blindly taking turns, frantic for an escape route. Every street seemed a mirror image of the last, each building a flawless iteration of mid-century Americana. It was like being trapped inside a malevolent snow globe. Just as despair threatened to engulf me, I saw it. The faded, spectral welcome sign I'd passed entering Havenwood. Beyond it lay the dark, tree-lined track that had ensnared me. I slammed the accelerator to the floor. The car bucked violently on the unpaved surface, branches lashing the windshield as I plunged back into the forest, fleeing the waking nightmare. For hours I drove, flinching at every shadow, convinced each bend concealed a return to Havenwood's eerie embrace. Only the sight of official highway markers allowed the knot of terror in my chest to loosen, permitting shallow breaths. The charming bed and breakfast remained an unvisited dream. I drove directly home, hands trembling on the wheel until the dawn finally broke, pulling into my own driveway only to dissolve into ragged, relieved sobs. In the ensuing days, I sought tangible proof of Havenwood. Maps were meticulously consulted, online databases interrogated, local historical societies contacted. No record existed. No town bearing that name occupied that region. Sometimes in the quiet solitude of late nights, doubt whispers. Could the entire ordeal have been a phantasm born of stress? A hyper-realistic nightmare conjured by exhaustion? But then my gaze falls upon the navigation device, dormant now, and I remember its confident pronouncements, leading me into that abyss. A chilling question lingers. How many other stray travelers has it guided toward Havenwood's silent streets? How many never re-emerged? I rely on paper maps now, adhering strictly to well-trodden paths. For I learned that while not all who wander are lost, some coordinates chart routes to places best left undiscovered. And occasionally, the most terrifying destination is the one meticulously erased from every map but memory. The path dissolved beneath our boots, and with it, my certainty. Trouble, I sensed it then, but only when the sun bled out behind the ridgeline, immersing us in an inkwell void that pulsed with unseen animosity. Did the sheer gravity of our predicament crash down. What had begun as a casual trek through sun-dappled woods warped into a desperate scramble against something inconceivable, a presence hunting us from the deepening gloom. Leo, that's me. Years I've spent navigating trails, believing I possessed an intimate knowledge of these forests, a familiarity akin to the lines on my own palm. Hubris, perhaps, led me to propose this outing to Clara and Ben. They were novices mostly, but I'd painted a picture of effortless beauty, a simple escape from the city's ceaseless clamor. We'd embarked in the crisp breath of morning, the air fragrant with pine resin and the rich perfume of damp soil. Initially, the way was clear, a ribbon winding through colossal trees, serenaded by a nearby brook's cheerful murmur. Laughter punctuated our conversation. We paused for photographs, marveling at sun-struck peaks through gaps in the canopy. Afternoon shadows began to lengthen when the first thread unraveled. The trail, once distinct, grew hesitant, indistinct. Blazes on trees became sporadic, then vanished altogether. Still, anxiety hadn't fully taken root. My GPS felt solid in my pocket, my internal compass reliable. We'd manage, I assured myself, clinging to fading confidence. Yet, as hours bled away and the sun slanted towards its demise, a disquiet coiled around us. The woods themselves seemed altered, ancient, heavier, watchful. The familiar symphony of birdsong yielded to a profound stillness, punctuated only by the dry rustle of leaf litter underfoot and the escalating cadence of our own breathing. Leo, Clara's voice stretched thin, a tremor betraying her effort at control. Are we adrift? Reassurance died on my tongue. The hollow denial wouldn't form. Deep within, the truth echoed her fear, utterly lost with night descending like a shroud. And then, my second blunder of the day. Instead of seeking defensible ground, establishing a makeshift camp, I urged us forward, driven by the frantic conviction that the marked path lay just ahead, if only we pressed on. The last vestiges of daylight winked out. The forest plunged into absolute black. We activated our headlamps, their narrow cones slicing the oppressive dark. That's when the sound reached us, a low guttural vibration, resonating somewhere between animal growl and something disturbingly other. It echoed, seeming to emanate from all directions and none. "What in God's name was that?" Ben whispered, his eyes luminous pools of fear in the reflected light. I forced a shake of my head, striving for a steady tone. "Wind, maybe, or a distant bear. Keep moving." But the sound didn't fade. It intensified, drew nearer, grew sharper. It acquired companions, the sharp crack of a twig under unnatural weight, the furtive skittering of leaves just beyond the lamp's reach. Something stalked us. Our pace involuntarily quickened, terror infusing exhausted limbs with adrenaline. My headlamp beam jittered wildly as we stumbled, half running, through grasping undergrowth. Clara cried out, a strangled gasp. I spun, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Her beam trembled, fixed on a point just outside the illuminated circle. Following her stare, I glimpsed it, a silhouette blacker than the night itself, possessing a fluid, unsettling motion no earthly creature should command. Then, like smoke, it dissolved back into the shadows. "Run!" The word tore from my throat as I seized Clara's arm, hauling her forward. We fled blindly, branches lashing our faces, unseen roots conspiring to trip us. The entity, or entities for the sounds now suggested multiples, paced us with contemptuous ease. A constant presence felt more than seen, always just behind. Ben fell first, a strangled cry as his boot snagged a hidden root. Skidding to a halt, I turned, reaching back for him. A flicker of movement registered at the edge of my vision. I wrenched my light around. For one heart-stopping instant, our pursuer stood revealed. Vaguely humanoid, yet fundamentally wrong. Limbs too long, jointed unnaturally. Its surface, skin wasn't the right word, seemed to writhe, a multitude of smaller forms composing the whole. And the face. Dear God. The face was a chaotic assemblage of distorted features and far too many eyes. Revulsion sent me staggering back. The flashlight nearly slipped from my grasp. Ben's shriek jolted me. The thing had him clamped around his ankle, dragging him inexorably into the consuming darkness. I lunged, grabbing Ben's arms, pulling with all my strength, but the creature's power was monstrous, indifferent. It drew Ben away as if he weighed nothing. "Leo, help me!" His terrified plea dwindled, swallowed by the night and the abomination it concealed. Clara sobbed beside me, her body racked with tremors. I wanted to offer solace, some impossible promise of safety, but the words were ash in my mouth, because a certainty cold and absolute settled in my marrow. Nothing would ever be truly okay again. We ran anew, lungs burning, legs numb with fatigue. Yet, however frantically we pushed, the sounds of pursuit remained, a relentless echo closing the distance. It was playing with us. The horrifying realization dawned. It could have overwhelmed us at any moment. This was sport, our fear, its sustenance. Just as exhaustion threatened to claim us utterly, a faint glimmer pierced the trees ahead. Hope, sharp and desperate, surged. A ranger station? Another campsite? Anything felt preferable to this suffocating chase. We burst into a small clearing and my fragile hope fractured. No salvation awaited, only a derelict cabin, windows like vacant eyes, its door askew on corroded hinges. But it offered walls, a barrier, however flimsy. Right now, that was everything. We tumbled inside, slamming the warped door, the sound echoing unnaturally loud. I heaved a decrepit table against it, a futile gesture against the power we'd witnessed. Clara crumpled in a corner, her breath tearing in ragged sobs. A swift scan revealed only dust, elaborate cobwebs, and the stale, musty odor of profound neglect. Silence descended for a beat, heavy and tense. Then the measured tread of footsteps on the porch, planks outside. A sound followed, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging across weathered wood, setting my teeth painfully on edge. "Please," Clara whimpered, burying her face in her hands, "make it stop." If only I could. Oh God, if only I could rewind time, erase the suggestion of this accursed hike from existence. But I could only stand rigid, back pressed to the far wall, a spectator to our own impending doom as the door began to groan and splinter under a methodical assault. Just as the wood shrieked its imminent failure, just as I braced for the inevitable confrontation, for the same fate that befell poor Ben, the improbable occurred. Distantly yet clearly, a rooster crowed, announcing the hesitant approach of dawn. Outside, the creature emitted a high-pitched shriek of pure frustration, a sound that vibrated the very air, rattling the loose window panes. Then, as abruptly as it manifested, the presence vanished. The suffocating weight that had pressed down on us all night lifted, leaving a silence so complete it felt like a physical blow. Clara and I remained huddled in that decaying refuge until the sun climbed high, painting the dusty interior with stripes of light. We were paralyzed by terror, unable to move, barely daring to breathe. When we finally summoned the nerve to step outside, the forest appeared utterly ordinary. Birds chirped, squirrels scampered, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves. The nightmare seemed a fever dream. But the scratches crisscrossing our arms, the icy terror still gripping our hearts, and the gaping void left by Ben's absence were undeniable truths. We eventually stumbled back toward civilization later that day, emerging onto a well-used hiking path like specters returning from another world. The official search for Ben lasted weeks, yielding nothing. Clara and I recounted a sanitized version of events to the authorities, omitting the parts that strained credulity, the parts about impossible creatures born of shadow. I doubt they truly believed even the parts we told. I don't hike anymore. Stepping into my own garden after sunset requires conscious effort because I carry the knowledge now, the certainty of what resides in the deep woods, waiting for the light to fail. I know that when darkness falls, the forest belongs to them. And sometimes when the night is profoundly still and the wind whispers through the trees just so, I hear it. That low, guttural thrumming, neither human nor beast. A persistent echo reminding me the nightmare isn't concluded, that somewhere in the unlit corners of the world, it waits, watching, and perhaps still hungry. "6 months have passed since this tract of land, this promise of solitude, became mine. Initially, its vast emptiness captivated me, the profound silence of the nights, the untamed forest beckoning just beyond my door. Formal paths held little appeal. My preference was for aimless rambling, for the satisfying yield of earth beneath my soles, for moments paused simply to absorb the sibilance of leaves stirred by an unseen hand. A man of simple tastes, I craved only clean air and the loamy perfume of the woods. Nothing more. Yet, barely a week into my tenure, an inexplicable strangeness began to thread itself through the quietude. The 7th dawn found me adrift, subtly unwell. Not illness precisely, but a dull throb behind the eyes, an odd internal pressure muffling the world. A walk, I reasoned, would purge the malaise. Pulling on a jacket against the chill, I ventured out beneath a sky the color of pewter. A desultory breeze met my face. The trees stood sentinel, ordinary in their stoicism, harboring a few chattering birds. My boots broke the fragile silence of fallen leaves as I trod the faint indentation I'd worn into the forest floor. Gradually, the cranial ache receded. My respiration deepened. Perhaps merely the residue of poor sleep, I mused. And then, a susurration. Arrested mid-stride, I listened. Was that my name? A fleeting echo on the air, almost lost. I strained, catching only the sigh of wind through branches, a sound like breath exhaled softly nearby. The name did not repeat. Dismissing it as phonic trickery, the breeze playing ventriloquist. I pressed onward for another quarter hour. The unease had faded to a mere phantom ache. I inhaled deeply, drawing in the rich fragrance of damp soil. Sufficient wandering for one morning, I decided, turning homeward. The woods seemed utterly benign. By the following day, the 8th of my seclusion, an unspecific disquietude had taken root. My stomach churned faintly. My gaze kept flicking nervously over my shoulder. An attempt to lose myself in a book on the rear porch proved futile. Restlessness twitching in my limbs. Setting the volume aside, I rose, surveying the tree line's dark edge. Another walk, perhaps, to soothe the jitters. Entering the woods, I consciously slowed my breathing, willing my shoulders to drop. Deeper in, it returned, unmistakable this time. My name breathed low and elongated, a sibilant tendril curling through the air. A prickle crawled across my scalp, my throat constricted. I spun, emptiness, silence. Then, again, the whisper emanating from the forest's denser heartwood. Wind? No, this felt deliberate, targeted, a summons. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a dampness slicking my palms. Despite the fear, a perverse curiosity, an inexplicable magnetism drew me forward. Rationality warred with instinct, but the call could not be denied. I advanced, plunging into denser thickets where the air acquired a distinct chill that seeped through my jacket. The whisper persisted, a phantom utterance teasing the very periphery of audibility. Above, the canopy thickened, filtering the daylight to a gloomy luminescence. A coldness traced my nape, tension knotted the muscles along my spine. Pushing aside grasping branches, I pressed on. Then, quite unexpectedly, my boot struck something firmer, a path, ancient and neglected, snaking through the undergrowth. Overgrown, yes, bordered by moss-furred stones, it beckoned. Here, the whisper intensified, no longer faint but insistent. My own heart throbbed, a frantic drumbeat in my chest, echoing in my ears. Time dissolved as I followed this forgotten way, perhaps 10 minutes, perhaps more. Thought surrendered to the singular urge, discover the source. No human sign, no flicker of wildlife disturbed the profound stillness. Only the crunch of my footfalls and the ragged cadence of my own shallow breaths broke the unnatural quiet. The trail terminated abruptly in a sun-dappled dell. At its heart stood a ring of weathered stelae, perhaps 2 feet tall, arranged with unnerving precision. Verdant moss consumed their surfaces, clinging thickest within time-worn grooves. Carvings, intricate and alien, their meaning remained opaque, mere lines and whirls defying interpretation. A knot tightened in my gut. The instant my foot crossed the clearing's threshold, the whispers ceased. Utter silence descended. I stood scanning the perimeter. Towering trees encircled the space, their dense boughs interlacing overhead, swallowing the sky. The air here was markedly colder, my exhalations plumed visibly. This was not mere quiet, but a heavy, pregnant silence, as if the clearing existed within its own hermetically sealed reality. My heart hammered, my skin prickled with 1,000 tiny needles. Hesitantly, I approached the circle, my boots sinking slightly into the damp, yielding earth. Crouching, I laid a hand upon one monolith. Its surface felt cool, abrasive. I traced a finger along a carved channel, its edges surprisingly sharp beneath the moss. A prickling certainty crawled up my spine. I was being observed. The sharp crack of a breaking twig echoed from the trees behind me. I whirled, hands balling into fists. Empty woods met my gaze. Motionless, I strained to hear, my breath catching in my throat, pulse thundering. An involuntary tick pulsed beneath my left eye, then a faint friction, like fabric brushing against dry leaves. Another rapid turn revealed nothing, yet the fine hairs on my arms lifted. A clammy sheen broke out on my brow. Retreating slowly from the stones, careful never to turn my back fully on the clearing's center, my feet tangled on unseen roots. The imperative to flee surged. "I don't belong here," I muttered, the words escaping thin and tremulous. I fled the dell, scrambling back along the overgrown track. The cold air bit at my face. Sweat trickled from my temples despite the chill. Every few strides, a compulsive glance backward confirmed only the looming sentinels of the forest. Wind stirred the canopy, eliciting groans from straining limbs overhead. Relief washed over me as familiar landmarks emerged, a mossy, fallen giant near the stream I often followed. I didn't slacken my pace until the familiar lines of my own backyard appeared. Stepping onto the porch felt like breaching the surface after too long underwater. A ragged exhalation escaped me, the tension finally easing its grip on my shoulders, though an ache lingered deep in my chest. Sleep offered no sanctuary that night. Whenever my eyes closed, the stone circle materialized behind my lids. Those cryptic sigils, the suffocating stillness. I thrashed in the sheets, mouth parched. The usual nocturnal chorus of insects, once soothing, now seemed punctuated by jarring clicks and scrapes that made me start. Seeking refuge in the mundane, I lit a small lamp in the living room, eventually succumbing to a fitful doze on the couch. Around 3, I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart battering my ribs. Had I heard it again? My name, a sibilant breath from the shadows. My eyes darted wildly around the dim room before acknowledging my solitude. Though I compelled myself back to bed, true rest remained elusive. In the ensuing days, I immersed myself in trivialities, tightening a loose cabinet hinge, silencing a complaining floorboard, trimming the modest lawn. Anything to occupy my thoughts, to banish the memory. Yet comfort remained out of reach. Each glance towards the forest boundary sent a cold dread plummeting into my stomach. An insistent, silent summons seemed to emanate from the trees, fraying my nerves raw. My appetite dwindled. I found myself adrift, losing minutes, sometimes longer, simply staring blankly through the window pane. The 10th day dawned, and with it, a resolve. This nameless fear would not master me. Lacing sturdy boots, armed with a heavy flashlight despite the midday sun, I strode towards the woods. Initially, I kept to the more frequented ways, the ground solid underfoot, the air sharp with pine. Birdsong provided a fleeting sense of normalcy, a brief calming, but as the trees pressed closer, the familiar chill returned. Ahead, the barely discernible track leading towards that place branched off. I faltered, a dull ache blooming behind my sternum. Just a daytime reconnaissance, I rationalized. To find a logical cause, ancient boundary markers perhaps, a forgotten folly. My intellect craved a mundane explanation. Reaching the dell, I found the circle unchanged, yet subtly altered. The moss seemed denser, greener. The carvings held the same inscrutable power. Silence reigned absolute. I circled the periphery, my steps muffled by the soft earth. Scattered nearby lay smaller stones, half interred. I lifted one, smooth, cool, marked by an odd indentation, then replaced it carefully, Instantly, the sensation of being watched returned, potent and palpable. A swift turn revealed only trees and dappled light. My heart leaped. No visible entity, yet the presence was undeniable. My throat tightened. A tremor started in my hands. Stepping back instinctively, I forced a word into the void. "Hello?" It emerged frail, swallowed by the stillness. Nothing answered but the ringing in my own ears and the painful tension seizing my neck. Pacing nervously around the stele, I detected a faint, unsettling odor. Decaying leaves mingled with a coppery tang like old blood. My stomach roiled. I switched on the flashlight, its beam stark even in daylight, playing it over the glyphs. Spirals, lattices, forms without name. As the light swept across the stones, a flicker of movement danced at the edge of my vision. My head snapped sideways. Only static tree trunks. A wave of pure terror constricted my chest. Clicking off the light, I stood frozen, listening only to the frantic rhythm of my own breath. The oppressive weight became unbearable. I turned and fled, breaking into a near run along the path. Legs trembling, lungs burning, thoughts scattering like startled birds. Back within the dubious safety of the house, I locked the doors, leaning against the frame, panting. Sweat beaded under my shirt. My hands shook as I poured and downed a glass of water. The television droned unseen, unheard, offering no distraction from the turmoil within. That evening, I pored over a local hiking guide discovered amongst the cabin's effects, searching desperately for any mention of stone circles, ancient carvings, anomalous clearings. Nothing. The booklet detailed only sanctioned trails and picturesque overlooks, ignoring the wood's hidden depths. Frustration mingled with rising anxiety. The headache returned, a familiar pressure building behind my ears. Drawn to the window, I peered into the impenetrable darkness where the forest breathed, a living entity just yards away. My eyes strained, seeking any aberrant light, any furtive motion, a momentary flicker, imagination, or something more. My pulse quickened. I recoiled from the glass. Morning arrived. I forced down breakfast, eggs, toast, ashes in my mouth. Weariness warred with a stubborn need to dispel this clinging dread. One final walk, I resolved, to prove it phantom, a trick of frayed nerves. Around noon, I set out, deliberately keeping to the wider, sunlit portions of the woods. I focused intently on textures, the rough tessellation of bark under my palm, the crispness of leaves underfoot. I listened for the unambiguous calls of birds, the honest sigh of wind, willing away any other sound. Yet the feeling persisted, a subtle wrongness trailing in my wake. Each turn revealed only inanimate woods, sunlight dappling the forest floor. Nevertheless, a cold dread slithered down my spine, tension locking my limbs, my stomach twisting. No whisper sounded this time, but the presence remained, an invisible weight, eyes boring into my back. My breath hitched, my legs grew leaden. I retreated hastily, my pace quickening until I reached the perceived safety of my own lawn. Heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird, I leaned against the cabin wall, eyes squeezed shut, throat raw from the exertion of flight and fear. Since that day, the forest remains unconquerable. Entering its shade triggers an immediate chill, a visceral drop in temperature felt deep in my bones. My gaze flits constantly, hyper alert to the slightest quiver of leaf or shadow. Faint rustlings morph into stealthy footsteps. The wind's breath becomes hushed respiration. Occasionally, that faint metallic earth scent drifts on the air. My muscles clench involuntarily, ears strain against a low hum, my mouth turns instantly dry. I attempt to press on, to reclaim my sanctuary, but the fear is a constant companion, clinging like damp moss. Even within the house, solace is scarce. Windows remain latched, day and night. I sit, listening, parsing every creak of timber, every scrape of branch against the roof, every gust rattling a shutter. Each sound jolts my heart. The darkness outside feels densely populated, concealing movement just beyond the glass, holding me captive under an unwavering, unseen scrutiny. Each morning offers a fleeting moment of reprieve upon waking, instantly shattered by the recollection of place. Logic provides no anchor, no evidence points to human mischief, no local lore illuminates the stone circle's origin. The thought of abandoning this place I poured my savings into, intended as a haven, now transforming into a crucible, feels like defeat. Yet every foray into the woods is an ordeal. The certainty of being followed, the icy finger tracing my spine, the tightening vice of anxiety. These sensations feel utterly real. Empirical proof be damned. All I can do is maintain vigilance, resisting the primal urge to flee. For now, I remain. Some mornings I still tread the forest paths, perpetually scanning my surroundings, ears tuned for that sibilant call, eyes searching the dense foliage for anomalies. My heart races, sweat prickles my skin, yet I persist, driven partly by a morbid curiosity to witness the culmination, partly by the fading hope that it is merely overwrought nerves, and partly, disturbingly, by the question of what truly waits out there, concealed amongst the moss-slicked stele and the silent, watchful trees, perhaps anticipating my return. This is the unsettling narrative of my refuge, taut, disquieting, yet undeniably mine, and for the present I endure. A flicker in the driver's overhead mirror, eyes ensconced in shadow, snagged my own reflection, and the mundane fabric of the late-night coach journey began to unravel. In that instant, certainty bloomed cold. This passage through the dark would be unlike any other. Beneath the deep cowl of a dark hood, that stare wasn't merely looking. It was an excavation tunneling into some bedrock dread I hadn't known existed within me. Little could I fathom that this silent collision marked the threshold of an ordeal poised to fray the very edges of my perception. My name is Alara. I pursue graduate studies at the City University, and that particular evening found me returning campus ward from a weekend filial visit. 4 hours stretched between my parents' home and my dorm, a distance I'd chosen to traverse via the nocturnal, budget-friendly bus line. Folly in retrospect. The coach yawned cavernously empty upon my boarding. Spectral presences, perhaps 2 or 3 souls, dotted the seats like forgotten luggage. I selected a berth midway down the aisle, nesting into the worn upholstery, anticipating only the drone of tires on tarmac. As the station lights receded, swallowed by the encroaching night, my awareness first registered him. A silhouette cloaked in obsidian fabric, occupying the rearmost bench. Initially insignificant, a mere fellow traveler. Yet as mileposts blurred past and the sparse scattering of passengers disembarked into pockets of provincial darkness, the chilling arithmetic became undeniable. Soon, only the driver, the hooded shape, and I remained, suspended in the humming metal shell, hurtling through the void. That's when the prickling began, an electric awareness crawling the nape of my neck, whispering watched. I chided myself. Paranoia, exhaustion's phantom limb. Yet each involuntary glance toward the driver's mirror confirmed it. Those eyes, obscured by the bus's dim, ambient glow, the face remained a cipher, but the gaze held an unnerving constancy. Unblinking pinpricks of focused light drilled into me from the gloom, unwavering, relentless. The window offered no solace, only the glassy void mirroring my own pale face against a tapestry of rushing black. The engine's low thrum and the rhythmic jolt over unseen road imperfections were the sole counterpoints to a silence growing thick with implication. An eternity seemed to pass before resolve hardened within me. I would break this unnerving visual tether, gathering my meager belongings with feigned nonchalance. I migrated forward, deliberately averting my gaze from the bus's rear depths. A fragile moment of relief settled over me, gossamer thin. Then peripheral vision snagged on motion. The hooded figure had also shifted, relocating to maintain the precise spatial relationship between us. Ice traced pathways through my veins. Coincidence strained credulity past its breaking point. A plea to the driver formed. Stop, let me out. But the landscape outside was an unbroken expanse of rural desolation. The prospect of being marooned on that lightless, deserted highway felt exponentially more terrifying than remaining captive within the moving vessel. My fingers scrabbled for my phone, a lifeline, only to find the screen barren, no service. We drifted through a communications abyss, utterly detached. The subsequent hour became a crucible. I sat bolt upright, muscles coiled, ears straining against the engine's drone for any hint of movement behind me. Twice, thrice, I thought I detected the whisper of soft footfalls on the aisle runner. Each time, a panicked swivel of my head revealed the figure immobile, still fixed in that penetrating stare. As the first tentative glimmerings of the city's outer halo appeared on the horizon, a measure of tension began to ebb. Nearly there, safety felt almost palpable, and precisely then it happened. A violent shudder convulsed the vehicle. The engine coughed, a strangled metallic gasp before surrendering to silence. We coasted to a halt on the road's shoulder, the interior lights flickering in a brief, spastic dance before extinguishing entirely, plunging us into near total blackness. "Apologies, folks," the driver's voice boomed, startlingly loud in the sudden stillness. "Engines decided to quit on us. Sit tight, I'll have a look." A scream clawed at my throat, demanding he stay, warning him of the watcher in the back, but my voice was a trapped bird. Powerless, I watched his silhouette descend the steps and vanish into the night, abandoning me to the suffocating darkness and the palpable, menacing presence behind. The mirror now reflected only impenetrable shadow, yet I felt him. An oppressive weight in the air, silence stretched, taut and terrifying, punctuated only by the ragged cadence of my own breathing. Then the sound, furtive steps, advancing with measured slowness up the central aisle. Raw panic detonated within me. Escape. Without conscious thought, I launched from my seat, stumbling blindly toward the front. My hand, Trembling violently, fumbled with the door lever, finally shoving it open. I spilled onto the tarmac, the cool night air a shocking slap. The driver was gone, vanished. Had it been moments or an age since he'd left? Time had warped, become meaningless. Instinct took over. I ran. Feet hammered the asphalt, propelling me away from the dead bus, into the unknown dark. Behind me, the distinct pneumatic sigh of the bus door reopening. He was following. My lungs seared, muscles screamed protest, yet I pushed harder, fueled by primal terror. Still, the footsteps echoed behind, steady, inexorable, never fading. Just as exhaustion threatened to buckle my knees, a beacon emerged from the gloom, the harsh fluorescent sanctuary of a gas station. With a final, desperate surge, I sprinted, bursting through the glass door, nearly colliding with the drowsy attendant leaning on the counter. "Help me," I choked out, words tumbling over each other. "Please, someone's chasing me." His eyes widened, taking in my wild-eyed, disheveled state. He reached for the phone, already punching numbers. "Who? What happened?" But as I spun, pointing toward the road, toward my pursuer, the words died on my lips. A cold, more profound than the night air, seeped into my bones. The highway stretched vacant in both directions, swallowed by darkness. There was no one. The arrival of the police brought interrogation, their questions weaving a net of confusion around my already frayed nerves. They discovered nothing. No sign of a hooded figure, no footprints other than my own and the driver's. The bus sat inert where we'd left it, the driver, grease-stained and perplexed, tinkering with the engine, utterly oblivious to the terror that had unfolded within his vehicle. As adrenaline's tide receded, insidious doubt seeped in. Had the strain, the sleeplessness conjured this phantom, a waking nightmare born of academic pressure? Yet, even as logic sought purchase, the memory of those eyes remained indelible, that unwavering scrutiny that had stalked me through the night. Real or imagined, the fear had been utterly authentic. The officers offered a ride back to campus. I accepted with numb gratitude. Driving away, a compulsion made me look back one last time, and perhaps it was a trick of the light. Perhaps only shadow, but for a fleeting heartbeat, I thought I discerned a dark, cowled shape, standing just beyond the gas station's luminous perimeter, watching our departure. The night bus became forbidden territory after that. Weeks dissolved into a haze of hypervigilance, shadows morphing into threats, solitude in public spaces becoming unbearable. Concerned friends and family murmured about anxiety, suggesting remedies for a mind perceived as overwrought. But I carried the certainty of the experience, inexplicable though it remained. Some things dwell in the shadowed corners of the world, defying easy categorization. And sometimes they choose the late-night coach, seeking company among the unwary. To this day, the sight of a hooded sweatshirt triggers a visceral lurch in my chest. Solitary nocturnal travel is a boundary I rarely cross, and occasionally, lost in the anonymity of a crowd, that familiar electric prickle returns to the back of my neck. When I turn, there is never anyone there. Yet a deep, unshakable conviction persists. Somewhere, those eyes are still watching, waiting for our paths to inevitably converge once more. So should you find yourself adrift on a sparsely populated bus as the world sleeps, and a disquieting sense of being observed settles upon you, heed that instinct. For the monsters we invent are sometimes less terrifying than those who sit quietly behind us, veiled in plain sight, anticipating the perfect moment. As for me, I'll keep to the daylight routes. Certain journeys carry too high a premium, for one never truly knows who or what might be sharing the ride. Pinpointing the genesis of the blemish is impossible now, lost somewhere in the restless heat of those initial nights. The air hung thick, a viscous shroud against the skin. I remember standing adrift in the living room center, directly beneath that juncture where wall met ceiling. Sleep, once more, had proven elusive, a casualty of warmth and some unnameable agitation. Silence reigned within the apartment, its stark white plains bathed in the diffuse luminescence spilling from a lone hallway lamp. My gaze drifted upward, eyes narrowing. There, nestled in the corner's apex, clung a dark smear, a subtle lesion on the plaster's perfection. It had no business being there. These walls were my own handiwork, painted mere months ago, intended to be immaculate. My first assumption grasped at the mundane. Mildew, perhaps, or the ghost of a water leak. I rose onto the balls of my feet, neck straining. The ceiling's texture offered no clue, smooth and undisturbed beneath the discoloration. An experiment. I extinguished the hallway lamp, plunging the space into near total blackness. Even so, the mark persisted, a shadow divorced from any discernible origin. Light restored, I willed myself back towards the bedroom, attempting to shrug off the disquiet, yet the feeling lingered, an insistent, subcutaneous itch. This apartment, secured a year prior after fleeing a place that never felt remotely mine, represented sanctuary, a deliberate erasure of the past, a fresh start. The building, though venerable, showed signs of care, and I'd specifically sought this top-floor haven with its lofty ceilings and generous windows. The promise of light and air had been intoxicating after the confinement of my previous studio. Relief, I'd thought. Now, supine and starkly awake, I sensed the dark patch hovering in the adjacent room, an unseen weight pressing down. My chest constricted, breaths came shallow. Ignore it, I commanded myself. Ignore it. Morning light offered no absolution. The stain remained, immutable, or at least changing in ways too subtle for the naked eye. Had fatigue simply amplified its presence the night before? I tried dismissing it, yet an unsettling quality clung to the anomaly. Dragging a chair beneath the corner, I ascended, arm outstretched, tentative. Fingertips brushed only cool, smooth paint. No moisture, no textural deviation, no film of dust. Stepping back, however, restored the illusion, or the reality. The dark shape clung fast, an obstinate moat upon the landscape of my vision, and perhaps my mind. The ensuing week saw me attempt immersion in work. As a freelance designer, my home is my studio. The quiet hum of the laptop and the midday sun slanting through the panes, usually sources of solace. Now, each time I rose to stretch, my eyes were drawn inexorably upward. The blemish seemed larger, not drastically, not yet, but undeniably expanded. What began as a speck now resembled a dark coin, its perimeter irregular. Stare too long and its edges seemed to writhe, a subtle flexion distorting the clean line of the ceiling. Armed with a step stool and a damp cloth, I tried erasure. The cloth returned pristine. The mark remained untouched. Standing perfectly still, I hunted for a source, a peculiar reflection, an odd angle of light, finding nothing. It wasn't color, this darkness, but rather its inverse, a void. Sleep deteriorated further. Night after night became a cycle of waking, abruptly, heart hammering, skin slick with sweat. Occasionally faint creaks whispered from above, easily attributable to the old building's nocturnal groans, its settling bones and murmuring pipes. Yet the atmosphere itself had shifted, grown heavy, pressing inwards, thickening the very air I breathed. One afternoon, driven by a creeping dread, I undertook a more thorough exploration, seeking any rational explanation. The previous occupant had abandoned several boxes in the diminutive storage closet, items I'd neglected to discard. Within, amidst yellowed periodicals and brittle newsprint, lay a small leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled largely with indecipherable script, but tucked between two leaves, I unearthed a faded monochrome photograph. It depicted a room corner. This room corner, I felt certain, though the perspective differed slightly. The walls appeared paler, starker, and there, in the image's upper reaches, barely discernible but undeniably present, was a smudge of darkness, eerily congruent with my own. Gooseflesh pebbled along my arms. The former resident must have seen it too. That night, I doused all illumination and stood sentinel in the living room's heart, vision adjusting to the profound dark. The stain loomed larger than ever, perhaps the breadth of my hand now. Silence pressed in, so absolute I imagined I could hear the frantic thrumming within my own chest. Then movement. The spot appeared to ripple, not a trick of the eye, but a fluidic disturbance, as if the darkness itself were somehow animate. My breath hitched. Illusion, I told myself. Ocular fatigue. But a suffocating tension built in my sternum, forcing a gasp. I lunged for a lamp switch. As light flooded the space, the shape froze, inert once more, yet undiminished. My efforts at denial crumbled. Over the next few days, the shadow's expansion accelerated, particularly under the cloak of night. Each morning revealed fresh encroachment, millimeters gained along the ceiling's edge, creeping inexorably towards the walls. Its borders frayed into subtle, unsettling configurations. Quasi-tendrils, thin filaments curling against the plaster, not patterned precisely, but possessed of a chilling deliberateness, as if methodically colonizing my refuge. The impulse to seek help arose, but whom does one consult about a living shadow? An electrician? A plasterer? An exorcist? My landlord remained conveniently out of town. I attempted calling Leo, my friend, but the words felt ludicrous, inadequate. I mumbled something about feeling unwell, needing company. He promised to visit the following week. A week felt an eternity away. That evening found me barricaded in the bedroom, door shut tight, the hallway light a flimsy bulwark against the encroaching gloom. Drifting through uneasy strata of semi-consciousness, I perceived motion. Rising, heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs, I cracked the bedroom door, peering out. The hallway lay dim, silent, yet the walls themselves seemed duller, their paint muted overnight as though the living room's affliction were somehow leaching outwards. Sweat filmed my body, my throat felt parched. I retrieved water from the kitchen, gulping it down, the need for action crystallizing. Confrontation felt inevitable. And so, flashlight in hand, I marched to the corner, directing the beam squarely at the offending darkness. The light exposed only the faint stipple of aged plaster, nothing more. Yet standing there, a tremor started in my legs. A presence, not auditory, not tactile, but a palpable weight. An intensity that knotted my stomach and sent icy tendrils up my spine. My heart hammered violently. A stale, metallic taste filled my mouth. The darkness possessed substance, and its influence wasn't merely visual. It seeped into the room's very essence. Days bled into a desperate, low-grade war. I taped sheets of white paper over the corner. Morning found them curled, peeling away as if rebuffed. The thought of repainting, of installing brighter lights, surfaced and sank. Futile gestures against something not of paint or shadow, but something other. Something that predated my arrival, perhaps by decades. Something intent on consuming the space I desperately clung to. Appetite evaporated. Evenings brought waves of nausea. Simple meals tasted of chalk. The apartment grew stifling, oppressive. Windows thrown wide offered little solace. The city's distant clamor felt remote, unable to penetrate the interior dread. Sunset became a harbinger. Leaving felt like the only sane option. A cheap motel, my car, but finances were precarious, and a stubborn, perhaps masochistic curiosity warred with my terror. Understanding felt like the only path to resistance. One particular night, the tension crescendoed. The shadow now claimed nearly half the ceiling, its dark pseudopods tracing the room's architecture. In the faint nimbus of my bedside lamp, I watched it shift, pulse, a slow, abyssal respiration. My own breathing grew shallow, ragged, pulse thundering in my ears. Trembling but resolute, I stepped into the living room. "What do you want?" The question emerged hoarse, swallowed by the unanswering silence and the shadow's relentless advance. The photograph surfaced in my memory. I returned to the storage closet, rummaging with renewed urgency, seeking another breadcrumb, any clue. Shoving aside dusty stacks of magazines, my fingers snagged on a folded paper wedged behind a loose baseboard, a receipt decades old for unspecified home repairs, scrawled on the reverse in unsteady script. It grows when you're afraid. A chill permeated my very marrow. Whoever lived here before knew. This was their cryptic warning. Fury, cold and sharp, mingled with the fear. Was this entity truly feeding on my terror? If so, could it be starved? But exhaustion frayed my nerves. Fear had become my baseline. Holding the flashlight steady required conscious effort. Facing the corner, arms crossed, tears stinging my eyes, I muttered, voice cracking, "You won't have me." I extinguished all lights save one small lamp near the exit. Then, forcing myself forward, I stood directly beneath the encroaching mass. My heart felt ready to burst. Slow breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Bile rose in my throat. I tilted my head back, compelling myself to look. The darkness quivered, a faint shimmer disturbing its edges. My knees threatened to buckle. I leaned heavily against the wall, sweat turning icy against my spine. Impulse took over. Recklessly, I raised a hand, pressing my palm flat against the wall, just beneath the shadow's lowest reach. I braced for contact, for something to seize my wrist, pull me into the void. Nothing. Only the familiar, chalky coolness of paint. Yet a faint creak resonated from above, a subtle displacement in the atmosphere, like an unseen current stirred. Nausea surged, violent and sudden. I stumbled back, hand clamped over my mouth, breath tearing through my lungs. The ceiling seemed almost entirely consumed now, a near total eclipse of the white plaster. The presence thickened, viscous, like wading through invisible pitch. My lungs strained. Every nerve shrieked for escape, yet I remained rooted, sweat tracing cold paths down my temples. Vision swam. A choice loomed: flee now or escalate. I snatched a nearby broom, jabbing its handle upward. The tip scraped impotently against the darkness. The handle, slick with sweat, slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. A curse escaped my lips. The darkness shuddered, and for a fleeting, horrifying instant, I perceived a shape within it, an elongated silhouette, humanoid but hideously distorted. That was the breaking point. I bolted, stumbling over the rug, bursting into the hallway's sterile brightness. I gasped, gulping air, head throbbing, heart a frantic drum. Pacing the narrow corridor, escape seemed the only option. Abandon everything. Yet, after moments that stretched into an age, a grim resolve pushed me back through the doorway. I had to know if it lingered beyond the threshold. Inside, a fragile quiet seemed to have settled. The lamp by the door flickered, then held steady. I looked up. The darkness remained, vast and consuming, but perhaps its advance had slowed. Had it retreated fractionally? Or was that merely hope's mirage? I retreated to bed, leaving the bedroom door ajar, the lamp burning defiantly. Sleep eventually claimed me, fractured by dreams of shifting voids and suffocating silence. Morning revealed a ceiling almost entirely lost to the stain. Yet something had shifted. The darkness halted just shy of my bedroom doorway, hesitant. Dragging a hand across my face, I felt the rasp of stubble, the clammy residue of fear. My reflection in the bathroom mirror offered a fresh horror. The skin beneath my eyes was unnaturally dark, bruised-looking. Leaning closer, I imagined a faint shadow flickering across my own features, an echo of the ceiling's blight. The decision solidified. I would leave at dusk and not return. A motel, the car, anything but this space. Yet, as I gathered essentials, a peculiar resistance manifested, the air near the threshold growing thick. Resistant, I forced myself through. Standing in the corridor, I cast one final glance back into the apartment. Through the dim light filtering from the hallway, I saw it. Within the ceiling's deep darkness, a twisted configuration, the hollow suggestion of a face, glimpsed only if one dared hold its gaze. I slammed the door, the sound echoing, my heart a wild bird trapped in my throat. Even now, gripping the cool metal of the stairwell railing, the sensation lingers. The presence remains, sequestered behind that door, clinging to walls that were briefly mine, waiting. My hand trembles as I brush sweat from my brow, catching my distorted reflection in the polished banister. For a sliver of a second, I see the shadow ripple behind my own eyes. I blink, and it vanishes, but the knowing remains, cold and certain. It isn't finished. That darkness has sampled my fear, and I suspect its appetite will not be confined to a single apartment. It is patient, it is hungry, and I fear that the next time I meet my own gaze, I may find I am no longer looking alone. Beneath Silas's grasp, the bench's lacquered wood felt slick, his own perspiration the culprit. A frantic drumming commenced against his ribs, a visceral protest against his presence here. Evening had already bled past 6, and the fledgling gallery on Elmwood Avenue, a mere stone's throw from his own stark flat, had unveiled itself. He sat marooned in a stark white corridor bathed in unforgiving light. The air, thick with the ghost of fresh paint and acrid floor sealant, carried another note, something cloying, sickly sweet, eluding definition. He'd come on the strength of whispers, rumors of a private collection veiled in owner silence, perhaps seeking solace for his living room's echoing emptiness, something vibrant, something human, to push back against the vacant walls. Never this. Initial canvases offered abstract terrains, forgettable washes of color, but the gallery deepened, its passages constricting, revealing stranger fruit. Before him now, a canvas towering nearly to his height, raw-edged, leaning like an accusation against the plaster. Figures populated it, swathed in somber fabrics. Their forms were sharp, yet their faces erased, smoothed into vacant ovals of unsettling beige. They clustered on a street rendered in shadow beneath the sickly citron glow of a solitary lamp. No gore, no overt menace, simply wrongness. And their posture, Silas felt with a prickle of certainty, angled those blank visages directly toward him. A difficult swallow scraped his dry throat. Silence reigned, save for the low thrum of climate control. No curator, no fellow patrons, just the sterile hum. He pressed onward. Another tableau. 3 shapes hunched around a table, their anonymity stark against a roughly textured, smudged backdrop. He felt their focus, a phantom scrutiny from featureless heads. A knot formed low in his gut. Again he moved, striving for composure. The cloying sweetness in the air thickened whenever he lingered near these portraits. Like overripe fruit fermenting, a scent pleasant turned putrid. His legs felt suddenly unreliable. Air. He needed air, or perhaps the cold shock of water on his face in some hidden washroom. Yet rounding another bend revealed a focal point, a larger canvas commanding the cul-de-sac of this narrow hall. Overhead track lights buzzed, their glare captured by the painting's ostentatious frame, gilded, polished to a mirror sheen. The paint itself possessed such a high gloss, it threw back a warped, funhouse image of Silas himself. He advanced with caution. This one differed. A lone figure occupied a shadowy interior, faceless like the others, but its stance was expectant, shoulders square to the viewer. Behind it, indistinct patterns hinted at wallpaper, maybe a tapestry. Leaning in, his own reflection swam across the slick surface, momentarily settling over the figure's vacant head. A startled flutter in his chest sent him recoiling. Had he truly seen his own features transposed onto that emptiness? The nape of his neck tingled. He scanned the vacant hall, still utterly alone. Panic, a cold vine, began its ascent. Just the varnish, he insisted internally. Stress, lack of sleep. Moving into the new place had left him ragged. This gallery, poorly lit and curated by eccentrics, was merely preying on his nerves. He pivoted, determined to find an attendant, an exit, anything, but a faint susurrus like shifting silk halted him. Glancing back at the canvas, he registered a change. The figure's shoulders seemed minutely canted now, a fractional adjustment. His pulse leapt. Impossible. Surely. A choked laugh echoed strangely in the stillness. Find the entrance. But which way? The corridors seemed to writhe and twist, the building's modest exterior belying an Escher-like labyrinth within. That insidious sweetness clung to him as he retraced his steps, trying to impose logic on the illogical layout. He passed the series of smaller portraits again, his stride lengthening into urgency. But they weren't the same. Where blank ovals had resided, something new festered. In the periphery of one canvas, he stopped, heart lurching, a single eye. Rendered with unnerving precision, a brown iris marbled with gold, it gazed out from the previously featureless expanse. Silas scrubbed at his own eyes. A waking dream? He looked again. The eye remained, fixed and terribly real. Fear spurred him onward, past the next canvas, the trio at the table. Now 6 eyes stared back, gleaming unnaturally, tracking his panicked passage. His breath hitched, sawing in his throat. The sugary miasma thickened, a palpable fog clinging to his senses. His limbs turned to lead. From the corner of his vision, a frame seemed to shudder, a brief, violent tremor. He blinked. It stilled. Yet now a low, resonant hum vibrated not just in the air, but seemingly from the walls themselves. Out. The imperative screamed in his mind. He rounded another turn, desperate for the lobby, for an exit sign, for anything mundane. Only another corridor greeted him, lined with yet more canvases, each surpassing the last in its quiet horror. Eyes bloomed everywhere now, solitary, paired, disembodied, floating within the painted void of absent faces. They swiveled as he passed, wet highlights glinting, pupils visibly dilating in the dim light. His throat tightened. The room swam. He braced a hand against the wall. The surface felt warm, tepidly alive, pulsing faintly beneath his palm. "Hello?" The word emerged as a ragged croak. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, vast and profound. It had to be theater, he reasoned frantically. Some avant-garde installation with hidden tech. But the isolation felt absolute. Where was everyone? He remembered a door near the entrance, back down the main artery. He forced himself back, past the glossy sentinel. He averted his gaze, yet his peripheral vision snagged on something that sent ice through his veins. The lone figure within wasn't alone anymore. A second form stood beside it, equally featureless but for 2 meticulously painted eyes aimed directly at him. Panic erupted. Silas broke into a stumbling run, his shoes slapping against the polished floor, the sound amplifying the frantic rhythm in his chest. He skidded to a halt before a smaller canvas he hadn't registered before, its frame a writhing mass of gilded vine-like carvings. Within its confines, 2 eyes floated in absolute darkness, detached from any form. An irrational urge surged. To cover it, to smother those staring orbs. He scanned wildly for anything, a cloth, a dropped program. A low table held only a single stark pamphlet. He snatched it. The gallery's emblem adorned the cover, austere and anonymous. Inside, dates, cryptic annotations, but no artist, no explanation for these painted nightmares. He flung it down, and then salvation, or its promise. The faint green glow of an emergency exit sign at the corridor's terminus. He lunged towards it, heedless now. behind him, he felt the canvases stir, a collective rustling awareness. He wouldn't look back. Couldn't. The sweet perfume crescendoed, thick and suffocating. His eyes streamed. A cough tore from him, verging on a gag. He slammed his palm against the exit bar. The door yielded. He burst out, tumbling onto the cool pavement of the now dark street. Night air, crisp and clean, rushed into his lungs. Relief, sharp and immediate. His shirt clung to him, drenched. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The door clicked quietly shut. Through the gallery's large front window, only darkness and the faint ghost of his own reflection under the street lamp looked back. Silas fled, his pace urgent on the concrete. Back within the dubious sanctuary of his flat, bare walls, a sofa, one stark lamp, he threw the deadbolt. Still his heart hammered, a frantic captive bird. The sensation persisted, unseen eyes boring into his back. He sank onto the sofa edge, cradling his head, fighting for even breaths. Safe now, wasn't he? He stared at the blank expanse of wall opposite, and phantom irises swam into focus against the white plaster, watching. He scrubbed at his face, but the cloying sweetness lingered, an olfactory ghost clinging to his clothes, his skin. The apartment's silence pressed in, offering no solace. The faint buzz of the overhead fixture made him jump. Every creak, every city noise from beyond the window felt amplified, menacing. He rose, drawn to the window. Outside, the city spangled the darkness. His reflection stared back from the glass, pale face, exhausted eyes, jaw clenched. But superimposed behind him, in the spectral depths of the reflection, he glimpsed it, a faceless shape lurking just beyond the lamplight's reach. His breath hitched. He whirled around. Nothing. Just the stark emptiness of his living room. A strangled laugh died in his throat. He hadn't brought back a painting, but he hadn't come back empty-handed either. He'd carried away a feeling. Those eyes, those impossible painted eyes, were now seared onto his psyche. The scrutiny hadn't ended at the gallery door. He checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror. His face seemed normal, yet were his pupils darker, dilated, unnervingly alert. Cold water splashed on his face did nothing to quell the tightening dread in his stomach. Back in the living room, he extinguished the lamp, plunging the space into shadow. Instantly, he sensed movement at the edge of vision, unseen rustlings in the dark. The gallery's horrors replayed behind his eyelids. The quivering frames, the suffocating perfume, the silent, featureless watchers who had sprouted eyes solely for him. Explanation eluded him. Belief from others felt impossible. But the truth resonated deep in his bones. A presence had latched on, followed him through the night. Standing there in the weighted quiet, Silas dared not glance at any window, any mirror, any surface that might throw back an image. He knew with chilling certainty what he might glimpse. The eyes were still out there, waiting, hovering in the shadowed corners of his mind. Or perhaps closer still, sharing the silence of his own apartment, watching him breathe.